Illy. Crow had learned long ago that the land did not care whether a man was lonely or not. The plains stretched wide and indifferent, swallowing sound and memory alike. He rode through them the way he did everything else, slow, careful, leaving as little trace as possible. Folks in nearby towns called him a giant, sometimes with awe, sometimes with fear, but mostly behind his back. Eli didn't mind. Silence had become his companion, steadier than people ever were. The sky was turning red when he saw her. At first he thought she was a shadow cast by the rocks, something the dying light had shaped into a trick of the eye. Then his horse shied, and Eli saw the dark stain against the sand, blood. He dismounted at once, boots crunching softly as he knelt beside her. She was native, her hair tangled with dust, her breathing so faint he had to lean close to hear it. One leg was twisted badly, and a shallow arrow wound marked her side. She should have been dead. Somehow she wasn't. Eli hesitated only a moment. He had lived alone too long to forget the dangers of vermeshling in someone else's fate. But the cold was already settling, and the night would finish what her injuries had started. He slipped his coat beneath her, lifted her with care that belied his size, and felt how light she was, like a bird starved by winter. She stirred once, a soft sound escaping her lips, and his jaw tightened. "Easy now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. The ride back to his cabin felt longer than it ever had. Every jolt made him tense, every breath she took sounding like a fragile promise. When he reached the cabin, he laid her on his own bed without thinking, stoked the fire until the room glowed, and cleaned her wounds with steady hands. He worked through the night, guided by instinct and stubborn hope more than skill. When dawn came, she was still alive. Eli sat in the chair beside the bed, exhaustion weighing heavy on his shoulders. He told himself he had only saved a stranger from the cold. He didn't yet know that by carrying her out of the desert, he had carried something else home with him, something that would change the shape of his solitude forever. The woman healed slowly, like the land after a hard winter. Eli measured the days by small signs, her breathing growing steadier, the fever breaking, the color returning to her cheeks. He spoke to her while he worked, not because he expected answers, but because silence felt heavier when she lay so still. He told her when the fire needed more wood, when the coffee boiled over, when the wind changed direction. It surprised him how natural it felt to talk to someone again, even one who slept through his words. When she finally woke for good, her eyes opened sharp and alert, dark as wet earth. Her hand moved instantly, reaching for a knife that wasn't there. Eli was across the room mending a strap, but he froze all the same. He turned slowly, raising his hands the way he would with a spooked horse. He didn't move closer. He didn't speak at first. He just let her see him, big, bearded, unarmed, and not advancing. "You're safe," he said at last, his voice low and careful. She watched him for a long moment, measuring every breath he took. Then she pushed herself upright and winced, pain flashing across her face. Eli stepped forward without thinking, then stopped himself, remembering how fear could sharpen faster than pain. He set a cup of water on the table within her reach and stepped back again. "Your legs hurt. Don't rush it." She drank, eyes never leaving him. "Why?" she asked finally. Her voice was rough, unused. Eli considered the question. "Because you were alive," he said. It was the only answer that felt honest. The days that followed were cautious ones. She gave her name as Ayana, but nothing more. She moved carefully through the cabin, testing the space like a wary animal, always aware of where Eli stood. At night, when the temperature dropped, she would sit close to the fire, wrapped in a blanket that dwarfed her. Eli noticed how she flinched less when he was near, how the tight line in her shoulders eased when he added another log to the flames. The first night the storm came, the wind battered the cabin walls and snow rattled against the windows like thrown gravel. Eli woke to find Ayana sitting on the floor near the hearth, knees drawn to her chest. Without speaking, he sat on the other side of the fire. The warmth filled the space between them, slow and steady. When a particularly loud gust shook the roof, her hand reached out, fingers brushing his. He didn't move, didn't pull away. He only let his hand remain solid and warm. In the firelight, trust began not as words, but as shared heat against the cold. The sound of horses reached the cabin before the riders themselves did. Eli was splitting wood when he heard it. Too many hooves, moving with purpose, not the lazy pace of men passing through. His body went still in a way it hadn't for years. Inside the cabin, Ayanna felt it too. She rose from the table, her face draining of color, eyes fixed on the door as if she could already see what waited beyond it. "They're looking for me," she said quietly. Eli didn't ask who. He set the axe aside and reached for his shotgun, checking it with calm, practiced movements. When the knock came, it was not a request. The door rattled under the weight of it. Eli stepped outside, closing it behind him, placing his broad frame squarely between the cabin and the men who had come riding up with dust and certainty clinging to them. "She's not yours to hide," one of them said, his hand resting too casually near his gun. "She killed a man. She was being taken," Ayanna's voice called from inside, sharp with truth. Eli didn't turn around. "You've said enough," he told them. His voice didn't rise, but it carried. "You won't take her from here." The men laughed at first. Then they saw his eyes. Something in them shifted. They argued, threatened, tried to step past him. Eli lifted the shotgun, not shaking, not angry, just resolved. The wind swept through the clearing, cold and unforgiving. At last, one by one, the men backed away. They left with hard looks and harder promises, but they left all the same. Eli stood there long after the sound of hooves faded. When he finally turned back inside, Ayanna was waiting, her hands clenched, breath uneven. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pressed her forehead against his chest, as if anchoring herself to something real. "If they come back," she said, her voice breaking despite her strength, "they'll bring death with them." Eli rested a careful hand on her back, feeling how small she was beneath his palm, how fierce her heart beat. "Then they'll have to come through me," he said. The words surprised him with how true they felt. That night, neither of them slept much. They sat close by the fire, shoulders touching, the cabin filled with quiet understanding. Eli realized he was no longer guarding a stranger. He was guarding his home, and Ayanna, listening to his steady breathing beside her, knew she had found something. Rarer than safety, she had found someone willing to stand, unmoving, between her and the world. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as if reluctant to leave them. Snow lingered in the shaded hollows, and the morning still carried a bite. But the light had changed. It stayed longer now, warming the cabin walls and the space between them. Eli noticed it in small ways, in how Ayanna moved more freely, her limp fading, in how she no longer startled when he crossed the room behind her. The silence they shared was no longer heavy. It was full. They fell into a rhythm neither of them named. She helped with the cooking, learned the shape of the land around the cabin, left small bundles of dried herbs hanging near the door. He repaired what was broken, brought in extra wood without being asked, listened when she spoke of her people in fragments and pauses. Some stories were too sharp to tell all at once. He didn't push. He understood wounds that healed best when left untouched. At night, the fire burned lower than it once had. They sat close, sometimes talking, sometimes not. Eli realized that the cold he had lived with for years, something deeper than weather, no longer reached him the way it used to. He had thought it was just the season changing. Then one evening, when Ayanna leaned against him as naturally as breathing, he understood the truth of it. "You were alone a long time," she said softly, as if sensing his thoughts. He nodded, didn't think it mattered. She tilted her head, looking at him with that steady gaze that saw more than he ever said. "It always matters," she replied. Spring came at last. Grass pushed through thawed earth. Birds returned to the trees near the creek. One morning, Ayanna stood outside the cabin, sunlight catching in her hair, and asked him what he would do now that the roads would open again, now that she could leave if she chose. Eli didn't answer right away. He watched the wind move across the plains, felt the solid warmth of her presence beside him. "I reckon I've already chosen," he said finally. She stepped closer, resting her hand over his heart, feeling its steady strength. In that moment, Eli knew the truth he'd never dared name. He had rescued her from the cold, yes, but she had saved him from a life spent bracing against emptiness. She was the fire he hadn't known he needed, the warmth that stayed when winter ended. As she leaned into his arms, the giant who once feared the endless cold of the world understood something simple and unshakable. Whatever storms came next, he would never face them alone again.